My name is Corinna, I'm 44 years old, and my family once laughed at my handwriting. It seems like such a small thing, doesn't it? Handwriting. Just squiggles of ink on a page, the curve of a letter, the slant of a line. But for as long as I can remember, those squiggles of mine were the punchline of every family joke. I never wrote neatly. Not in school, not in college, not even now as an adult with children of my own. My letters slope downward, my loops tangle into one another, and my signature looks more like a rushed wave than a name. Teachers called it sloppy, friends called it messy, my family called it a disaster. You'd think someone her age would have learned how to write by now, my cousin Serena once said at a family gathering, waving one of my handwritten grocery lists in the air. Everyone laughed, and I smiled weakly, pretending it didn't sting. Another time, I had written a birthday card to my niece, pouring love into every word, only for my brother to snort, "Can anyone even read this? Looks like chicken scratches." The room filled with laughter again, and my niece giggled too, not realizing how much her uncle's words cut me. It happened so often I lost count. Little things, a note on the fridge, a recipe written by hand, a thank you card. They always became ammunition for someone else's humor. "Corinna's at it again," they'd laugh. "Guess we'll need a translator." On the surface, I laughed along. I learned to shrug it off, to shake my head like it didn't matter. But deep down, every chuckle carved out a piece of my pride. Because handwriting, as small as it may seem, was my weakness, and they knew it. I wasn't clumsy. I wasn't foolish. I had built a solid life for myself, worked hard, and made decisions that required intelligence and grit. Yet, somehow, the way I formed my letters became the lens through which they judged me. To them, my handwriting was proof that I wasn't meticulous enough, smart enough, capable enough. And the more they laughed, the more I began to wonder if maybe they were right. I remember one night vividly. I had written a letter to my daughter's teacher, explaining why she would miss school for a family trip. I tried so hard to write carefully, but when I handed it to my daughter, she frowned. "Mom, maybe I should type this for you. Your handwriting's, you know." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I knew what she meant. That night, sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at the pen in my hand, I felt a wave of shame. Shame for something I couldn't control, something so trivial, yet so defining in the eyes of others. My handwriting was messy, yes, but it didn't make me less capable, less intelligent, less worthy. Still, their laughter stayed with me. It lingered in every note I wrote, every time I signed my name on a check, every time I jotted down a reminder on a sticky note. I could hear their voices mocking, see their smirks, feel the sting. It wasn't just handwriting anymore. It was the way they saw me. They didn't see Corinna, the woman who had worked tirelessly to help care for her parents in their final years. They didn't see Corinna, the woman who had kept the family business afloat when others were too distracted or disinterested to try. They didn't see Corinna, the mother, the sister, the daughter who gave everything she had to keep this family together. They saw scribbles on a page. They saw a weakness they could laugh at. But what they didn't know, what none of them even imagined, was that the same handwriting they mocked, the same signature they rolled their eyes at, had already determined their futures. Every time they laughed at my loops and scratches, I held my tongue. Every time they dismissed me, I stayed quiet. Every time they used my handwriting as a weapon, I let them believe it didn't matter. But it did. Because one day, they would find out that my so-called weakness was actually my greatest strength. That the same handwriting they mocked was the handwriting that had signed the will that decided who inherited what. The will that carried our parents' legacy. The will that would change everything. And when that day came, their laughter would die in their throats. I could already imagine it, their faces frozen, their eyes wide, their voices silent as they realized the truth. They had spent years belittling me for something that didn't matter, all while overlooking the fact that my signature mattered more than anything else in the room. That day wasn't here yet, but it was coming. And I would be ready. But what they didn't know was that this so-called weakness was also my power. They mocked me for years. It never started as cruel, not at first. When I was little, my teachers scolded me for my messy letters. "Slow down, Corinna," they would say. "Take your time." But no matter how hard I tried, my pencil seemed to have a mind of its own. My loops collided, my lines tilted, my words ran together like a river of ink. At home, my siblings thought it was hilarious. They'd peek into my notebooks, then run through the house, shouting, "Look at Corinna's hieroglyphics." My brother once taped one of my homework pages to the fridge like a piece of abstract art. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because what else could I do? As the years went on, it became a family joke. A cruel kind of tradition. When I left sticky notes on the fridge reminding people about chores, they'd squint and pretend they couldn't read them. "Is this in English?" "Serena," my cousin, would say, holding the note up dramatically. "Or is it code?" The others would burst out laughing. I would just shake my head, pretending it didn't sting. But the laughter always lingered. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned to write only what was necessary, and I tried to type whenever I could. But still, there were times when handwriting was unavoidable. Cards, letters, forms, that's when the jokes returned. I'll never forget my 18th birthday, when I wrote heartfelt thank you notes for the gifts I had received. I put effort into each one, carefully writing words of gratitude. A week later, my aunt called me, chuckling into the phone. "Corinna, sweetie, I had to guess at what you wrote in your note. Your handwriting is just, well, let's say unique." Unique, that was her polite word. My cousins weren't so polite. They mocked my thank you cards openly, passing them around at a family dinner. "Can anyone decode this one?" one cousin asked. "It looks like ancient runes." The table erupted in laughter. I smiled tightly, my cheeks burning, and tried to tell myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. The older I got, the worse it seemed. At work, my colleagues teased me if I left a handwritten note. At family gatherings, no one missed an opportunity to make a comment. It wasn't just playful anymore, it was dismissive, belittling, a way to remind me that I wasn't taken seriously. Serena, especially, seemed to take pleasure in it. She was meticulous, her handwriting neat and beautiful, almost artistic. She would compare her cursive loops to my jagged scribbles, holding them up like exhibits in a courtroom. "Now, which one would you trust to sign an important document?" she'd ask, her voice dripping with mockery. The others would laugh, and I would force a smile, but my stomach churned every time. It reached a point where I dreaded writing anything in front of them. I would hide grocery lists in my pocket, scribble reminders only in private, and avoid handwritten notes altogether. If I had to sign something, I would do it quickly, hoping no one would notice. But they always noticed. When my parents fell ill and I began managing their bills, my siblings joked that I would probably pay the wrong company because no one could read my checks. When I wrote reminders about doctor's appointments, Serena took one look and said, "If the doctor can read this, he deserves a medal." The laughter filled the room, bouncing off the walls until I felt small, invisible, and humiliated. It wasn't just about my handwriting anymore, it was about what they thought it represented. To them, my messy penmanship was proof that I was careless, scatterbrained, unreliable. Never mind that I was the one balancing the accounts, paying the bills, cooking meals, and keeping the house running. My handwriting became the symbol of all they thought I wasn't, and the worst part? I started to believe them. Every joke, every smirk, every dismissive comment chipped away at me. I began second-guessing myself in other areas of life too. Was I careless? Was I really incapable? Was I the weak link in the family chain? It's strange how something so small can carry so much weight when it's used as a weapon long enough. By the time I was in my 30s, the jokes weren't funny anymore. They were sharp, cutting, designed to put me in my place. I could hear the smirks in their voices before the words even came. And no matter how hard I worked, no matter what I accomplished, one look at my handwriting was enough to reduce me in their eyes. I told myself I could ignore it, that I was stronger than their laughter. That what mattered was who I was, not the way I formed my letters. But ignoring it didn't erase the sting. And deep down, I longed for the day when I could prove them wrong, not just about my handwriting, but about me. I thought I could ignore it, until the laughter became unbearable. The worst moment happened at a family dinner. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday meal, the kind my mother used to insist on when she was alive. A long table covered with dishes, roast chicken, potatoes, green beans, and fresh bread lined the dining room, and relatives filled every chair. Laughter floated through the air, the sound of glasses clinking, children chattering, and the murmur of conversations overlapping. I had brought a handwritten recipe card with me that day. It was one of my mother's recipes, a dish she used to make every Easter. I had copied it down years ago, in my messy handwriting of course, and thought it would be a nice gesture to share it with my cousins. Maybe, I thought, it could spark a little warmth, a little nostalgia. I passed the card across the table to Serena, saying, "It's Mom's lemon tart recipe. I thought you might like to have it." She looked down at the card, and for a fleeting second, I saw something almost tender in her expression. But then she smirked. She tilted the card so everyone nearby could see, her voice loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Oh, look at this!" Corinna's handwriting strikes again. The table erupted. My brother leaned in, squinting exaggeratedly. "Is this lemon tart or lemon tar? Because this looks like it was written in a thunderstorm." Laughter. Always laughter. Another cousin piped up, "Are we sure this isn't a doctor's prescription? Because I can't tell the difference." Serena waved the card dramatically, her perfectly manicured fingers holding it like a prop. "No, really, this is unbelievable. How do you even read this, Corinna? It's like some secret code. Maybe you should have been a spy." The room roared with laughter again, forks clattering against plates as people chuckled into their food. Even the kids giggled, though they didn't understand why. I sat there frozen, heat rushing to my face. My hands trembled slightly under the table. I forced a laugh, a thin sound that barely made it past my lips. "Well, I guess you get used to it," I said weakly. But inside, I felt something splinter. It wasn't just the recipe card. It wasn't just a joke. It was years of being diminished, reduced to scribbles on a page, as though that one flaw defined everything about me. I glanced at Isabel, my sister, hoping for support. She gave me a sympathetic smile but said nothing. Paul, my brother, shrugged, clearly unwilling to get in the middle. The silence of their defense felt as loud as the laughter itself. Serena leaned back in her chair, still holding the card like a trophy. "Seriously though, if this is supposed to be a recipe, I hope you already memorized it, because nobody else will be able to follow this. You might poison someone if they try." The words sliced through me sharper than any knife on the table. I stared at her smug grin, at the way she reveled in the laughter, and something inside me hardened. I dropped my eyes to my plate, pushing food around with my fork, pretending to eat. My appetite was gone. All I could hear was the echo of their laughter, circling in my head like vultures. That night, when the dishes were cleared and the goodbyes said, I drove home in silence. My daughter sat in the passenger seat, quiet too, sensing my mood. She glanced at me once, her eyes filled with a sympathy that hurt worse than the laughter. When we got home, I went straight to my room. I sat at my desk, the recipe card in my hands, staring at the messy loops and slants. For years, I had told myself their laughter didn't matter, that I was stronger than their jokes, that I could ignore it, but I couldn't, not anymore. Tears blurred my vision, not just from hurt but from anger at them, anger at myself for letting it go on for so long, anger at the way they had turned something so small into a weapon. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would not stay silent forever. I didn't know how or when, but I knew there would come a day when the laughter would stop. A day when they would realize that my handwriting, messy as it was, held more power than their perfect loops and polished jokes. And when that day came, I wouldn't have to say a word. My signature would speak for me. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't stay silent forever. What they forgot was who I really was. To them, I was the cousin with messy handwriting, the sister whose notes looked like scribbles, the woman whose cards were unreadable. But behind those jokes, Behind the smirks and chuckles, they seemed to forget the truth. I was the one holding everything together. When my father passed away suddenly, it was me who stepped in to manage the accounts. My siblings were too overwhelmed with grief or too busy with their own lives to handle the endless paperwork that came with closing his estate. I was the one who called the insurance companies, who settled debts, who made sure the house bills were paid on time. When my mother's health began to decline, it was me who took her to doctor's appointments, sat beside her in waiting rooms, and coordinated her care. Serena showed up now and then with flowers and a camera-ready smile, but I was the one sitting up at 2 a.m., listening to my mother wheeze, holding her hand until she fell back asleep. They laughed at my handwriting, but they forgot who was signing the checks that kept the lights on, the pharmacy bills paid, the groceries stocked. They forgot who balanced the books for the family business after my father's death. My parents had owned a small antiques shop, a charming little place filled with memories and hard work. When Dad was gone, everyone assumed the business would crumble. But I took over. I poured through ledgers, made calls to suppliers, and even learned how to market online when none of the others cared to try. They mocked my notes, but they forgot who wrote the invoices that kept our shop alive. They forgot that behind every chicken scratch signature, there was a woman who understood responsibility better than any of them. Even Leon, my late husband, used to say it, "Corinna, you don't give yourself enough credit. You keep things moving when everyone else is standing still." He never laughed at my handwriting. He teased me gently sometimes, but never cruelly. To him, it was just a quirk, one of many things that made me me. And he always reminded me, it's not how neat your letters are, it's what you stand for that counts. But the others never saw that. They saw only the loops and tangles. They saw only the surface. That was the thing about my family, they were quick to mock, but slow to see. They noticed flaws before they noticed sacrifices. They pointed out weakness before they acknowledged strength. And I let them. For years, I let their laughter wash over me without fighting back. I convinced myself it wasn't worth the argument. That keeping peace was more important than correcting them. That they would never understand anyway. But after that family dinner, sitting at my desk with the recipe card in my hands, I realized something. Their laughter didn't just mock my handwriting. It erased everything else I had done. Every sacrifice, every late night, every responsibility I carried alone. And yet, I had proof, written proof that I wasn't irrelevant. Because while they dismissed my handwriting, while they ridiculed my signature, they overlooked one simple truth. It was that very signature, that very scribble, that appeared on the most important documents in our family. The will, the estate papers, the business agreements. When my parents had first drawn up their will, I was the one they asked to be executor. Not Serena, with her beautiful cursive, not my brother Paul with his loud voice. Not Isabel, who always played peacemaker, me. Because they knew, behind the messy handwriting, there was reliability, dependability, strength. I still remember the day we sat in Mr. Halden's office, my parents leaning on me as we signed papers that would one day dictate the future of everything they had built. My father's hand trembled slightly as he signed. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, and then it was my turn. I wrote my name messy, jagged, unmistakably mine on the line beside executor. The ink was barely dry before Serena leaned over, muttering, "Good luck to the lawyer trying to read that." I had smiled weakly then, brushing it off. But now, years later, those same papers sat locked in my study. My signature, the same one they mocked, was the seal of authority, the line that made everything valid. It wasn't just a joke anymore, it was power. I thought about that night at the dinner table, about the laughter echoing in my ears, about the recipe card being waved like a banner of my supposed incompetence. And I thought about the documents in my study drawer. The ones that carried my signature at the bottom. The same loops, the same slants, the same messy scrawl. The difference? Those documents couldn't be laughed away. They carried weight, they carried law, they carried the future. And one day, when the time came for the will to be read, my family would have to face a truth they never saw coming. They thought my handwriting was a weakness. But in reality, it was the very thing holding their lives together. and one document carried more weight than any of their jokes. It began with my parents' estate planning. The first time I understood the weight of my handwriting was the afternoon my parents called me into the kitchen. I remember the smell of fresh coffee and the way my mother's hands fidgeted with the lace tablecloth. My father, steady as always, folded his arms and gave me the look that meant he'd already made a decision. "Corinna," he said, "we need you to help us with something important." I sat down across from them, unsure of what he meant. My parents were always private about money and future plans. For them to bring me in meant something serious. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were forms from Mr. Halden, our longtime family lawyer. The words, "Last Will and Testament," stared up at me in bold, black letters. My stomach tightened. "We're not planning on going anywhere soon," my mother said gently, as if she could see the worry cross my face. "But it's time. We want things to be clear. We've worked too hard to let this family fall apart over misunderstandings." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course. Whatever you need." That's when my father leaned forward. "We want you to be executor of the estate." The words stunned me. I blinked, unsure I'd heard right. "Me?" "Yes," he said simply. "You, not Paul, not Isabel, not Serena, you," I stammered. "But why me? My handwriting alone." My mother reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "Because you're the one who gets things done, Corinna. You've always been reliable. When your father had his surgery, you kept the shop afloat. When I got sick last winter, you organized all the appointments. You don't crumble under pressure." My father's voice was firm. "Executor is about responsibility, not handwriting. It's about judgment, and we trust yours more than anyone else's." Tears pricked my eyes. For years I had been the butt of jokes, the target of dismissive laughter. But in that moment my parents' words washed over me like a balm. They saw me. Really saw me. Later that week, we went to Mr. Halden's office. I remember the tall shelves lined with books, the ticking grandfather clock in the corner, the way the sunlight streamed across the polished oak desk. Halden explained everything carefully, outlining how the estate would be divided, what responsibilities the executor would carry, and how my role would be crucial in ensuring their wishes were respected. When the time came to sign, my parents both leaned heavily on the pen, their signatures steady but slow with age. Then Mr. Halden turned to me. "Corinna, your signature here confirms your acceptance as executor." My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the pen. I knew what my handwriting looked like. I knew Serena, if she were there, would have snickered. But this wasn't a grocery list or a recipe card. This was something far more powerful. I pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled my name in the only way I knew how: messy, jagged, unmistakably mine. When I lifted the pen, the signature sat there like a defiant statement. "Mr." Halden smiled. "It may not win a calligraphy contest, but it's legally binding. That's all that matters." My parents laughed softly, not in mockery but in warmth. My father patted my shoulder. "That's the one signature that matters most, Corinna." That day changed everything for me, though I didn't let anyone else know. To the rest of the family, I was still the cousin with the ugly handwriting. But inside, I carried a secret. My scribbles had the power to control the future. Over the next few years, as my parents' health continued to decline, I found myself returning to those signed documents again and again in my mind. Every time Serena mocked me, I thought of that signature. Every time my brother chuckled about my notes, I thought of the weight of the pen in my hand that day. They didn't know that while they laughed, I was the one holding the strings. They didn't know that their futures had already been signed, sealed, and secured by the very handwriting they mocked. It was almost poetic, really. My weakness, what they had weaponized against me, had become my shield. My strength. But I didn't flaunt it. I didn't throw it in their faces. Not yet. I tucked the knowledge away, quiet and patient, because I knew one day the truth would come out, and when it did, the laughter would stop. No one else knew that my handwriting had already sealed their futures. At first, I didn't tell anyone. After that day in Mr. Halden's office, I carried my parents' trust quietly, like a secret folded in my pocket. No one else knew the truth that my messy signature already bound the estate. That the very handwriting they mocked had become the seal on their futures. And I intended to keep it that way. Life carried on. My parents grew frailer, and my role in their lives grew larger. I managed their medications, handled the bills, and kept the antique shop running smoothly. To the outside world, I was dependable, organized, and efficient. But within my family, the same old jokes continued, like clockwork. Whenever I left a note on the fridge for Isabel reminding her of Mom's appointment, she'd squint dramatically. "Are you sure this isn't a treasure map, Corinna?" The others would laugh, shaking their heads at my scribbles. If I wrote out a grocery list and asked Paul to pick something up, he'd groan. "Why don't you just text it?" My eyes aren't built for hieroglyphics. And Serena, of course, never missed her chance. At one holiday gathering, she held up one of my handwritten recipe cards and announced to the room, "Corinna's at it again, writing in her secret code language." Laughter rippled through the family, and I forced a smile as I stirred the soup. But while they laughed, I kept quiet, because every joke they made only reminded me of what they didn't know. When I looked at my handwriting, I no longer saw weakness. I saw power. Each messy loop and jagged line carried authority. Each signature was a stamp of responsibility. Each scribble was proof that I, not Serena or Paul or anyone else, was the one my parents had trusted. It gave me a strange sense of calm. When the jokes came, instead of shrinking, I began to observe. I watched their faces as they laughed, listened to the careless tone in their voices. They believed they were laughing at someone powerless, but I knew better. And that knowledge became my armor. Sometimes, when Serena teased me too sharply, I'd catch myself smiling not because I enjoyed it, but because I knew how wrong she was. Her laughter was hollow. Her confidence misplaced. If she knew that my signature, the very one she mocked, was on the will that determined her future, her smirk would vanish in an instant. Other times, when Paul sighed at my notes or Isabel rolled her eyes at my lists, I'd remind myself, they don't know, but they will. Still, I never spoke up. I never threw it in their faces. I could have. I could have silenced them with a single sentence. "That handwriting you laugh at is the one that decides what you inherit." But I didn't. Because I wanted the truth to come out at the right time, in the right way. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. Not as a defense, I shouted in anger, but as a reality they couldn't deny. So I stayed quiet, carrying my parents' trust like a stone in my chest. It was heavy, yes, but it also grounded me. And as the months passed, I began to realize something else. Silence was its own kind of power. Every time they laughed, I stayed calm. Every time they mocked, I smiled faintly. And slowly, without meaning to, I shifted the dynamic. Their laughter no longer wounded me. It revealed them. Their smallness, their pettiness, their inability to see beyond the surface. And though they didn't know it, every word they said only tightened the irony of what was to come. Because the day would come when the safe in my study would be unlocked. When Miss Halden would sit before them, papers spread across the table, and read the words that carried my messy signature at the bottom. The same signature they had laughed at for decades. And in that moment, their laughter would turn to silence. But the time was coming when the truth would surface. The breaking point came when my cousin Serena mocked me again. It was a warm spring afternoon when the family gathered at Serena's house for her birthday. She had always been the type to throw grand parties, tables decorated with flowers, perfectly arranged hors d'oeuvres, music drifting through the air like she lived in a magazine. Spread. Serena thrived on appearances, and she loved being the center of attention. I arrived with a gift I had, wrapped myself a scarf I'd knitted over the winter. I had attached a handwritten card to it, carefully choosing my words of love and congratulations. Despite everything, I still wanted to show kindness. When Serena tore open the paper, she held up the scarf with a smile. "Oh, it's lovely, Corinna. Thank you." For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different. Then she glanced at the card. Her smile twisted into a smirk, and her voice lifted so everyone around could hear. Well, here it is again, the infamous Corinna handwriting. She held the card up like it was evidence in a trial. Can anyone actually read this? The people nearest her leaned in, chuckling as they pretended to squint. One of her friends joked, "It looks like hieroglyphics." Another said. Laughter rippled across the room. I froze, my cheeks burning. My gift, my kind gesture, had become another stage for her cruelty. Serena wasn't finished. She set the scarf down carelessly and began to read aloud, or rather, stumble deliberately over my words. Let's see. Dear Serena, happy birthday. May this year bring... Is that what it says? Or does it say, may this year bring trouble? Oh, who knows? She laughed loudly, her voice ringing above the others. The room erupted in laughter again. I forced a small smile, trying to mask the hurt clawing at my chest. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of my chair. I had grown used to their jokes. But something about that moment felt different. Maybe it was the way Serena tossed the card onto the table like it was garbage. Maybe it was the way no one, not Isabel, not Paul, not anyone spoke up for me. Maybe it was just the years of cruelty finally stacking too high. Whatever it was, something inside me snapped. I excused myself and slipped out onto the patio, away from the noise. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. I leaned against the railing, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. I thought of all the times I had stayed silent, all the dinners, all the gatherings, all the moments when I had swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. And I thought of the documents tucked safely away in my study, signed with the very signature Serena was mocking in front of her friends. If only she knew. If only she understood that my handwriting wasn't a joke, it was the key, the power, the line that determined her share of the inheritance she assumed she would one day collect. The irony was almost too much to bear. As I stood there, the laughter drifting faintly from inside, I made a decision. I would not stay silent much longer. The day was coming when the truth would surface, and when it did, Serena's smirk would finally disappear. I went back inside, calmer now, but different. My silence had become less about weakness and more about patience. I didn't need to defend myself with words, not yet. I would let the will do the speaking for me. Serena didn't notice the change in me that day. She kept laughing, kept tossing her jokes around like confetti, but I smiled faintly to myself, holding on to the secret, because I knew something she didn't. One day soon her laughter would die on her lips. And I knew the will would reveal everything. That day came sooner than I thought. My parents had been gone for months when the call came from Mr. Halden. The time had come to gather the family and read the will. I had known it was coming. I'd been preparing myself for it since the day I first signed my name in his office, but the weight of it still pressed heavily on my chest. The gathering was set at my mother's old house, the one filled with so many memories it felt as if the walls themselves were alive with whispers. I arrived early, making sure everything was in order. The chairs, the water glasses, the quiet dignity of the living room where it would all unfold. Slowly, the family began to arrive. Isabel with her polite smile, Paul with his restless energy, Serena with her air of superiority. Even before the proceedings began, I could see it in her eyes, the assumption, the unshakable belief that she was entitled to whatever share my parents had left behind. She greeted me with a smirk. "Corinna," she said smoothly, "I hope you remembered to bring the documents. Wouldn't want to lose anything important in all that messy handwriting of yours." The words stung, but only for a moment. Then I smiled faintly, a private thought steadying me. "You'll see soon enough." By the time everyone was seated, the air was thick with anticipation. Halden entered, his presence quiet but commanding. He placed a leather folder on the coffee table and adjusted his glasses. The room hushed instantly. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "We're here to honor the wishes of George and Evelyn Grant. Their will and estate plans were drawn up years ago, with revisions over time, and today I will read them in full." The family leaned forward, eyes sharp with greed and expectation. I sat back in my chair, hands folded calmly in my lap. I already knew what was coming. He started with the small bequests, heirlooms, keepsakes, items of sentimental value. My mother's jewelry to Isabel. My father's antique watch to Paul. The piano to Serena. Each announcement was met with murmurs of approval, occasional nods. But then came the moment the room had been waiting for, the division of the estate. Mr. Halden's voice was steady. The executor of the estate, designated in the original and revised documents, is Corinna Grant. A ripple of surprise crossed the room. Serena blinked, her lips parting slightly. Paul frowned. Isabel's brows shot up. Executor? Serena repeated, her tone incredulous. Her? Yes, Mr. Halden said firmly. Her? Your parents entrusted Corinna with this responsibility. All eyes turned toward me. I didn't flinch. I met their stares with quiet resolve. Mr. Halden continued. As executor, Corinna has been given authority over the estate's distribution and legal management. This includes final say in the division of assets, the settlement of debts, and the oversight of all property transfers. The silence was deafening. Serena's face flushed, a flicker of panic in her eyes. She forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle. Well, that's surprising. I mean, really? With her handwriting? She gave a nervous chuckle, waiting for the others to join in. But no one laughed this time. Paul shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Isabel looked down at her lap. The room remained still. Mr. Halden adjusted his glasses again, then placed a single page flat on the table. This is the most recent copy of the will. Signed by George Grant, Evelyn Grant, and Corinna Grant, executor. He tapped the bottom of the page. And there it was. My signature. Messy, jagged, imperfect, but unmistakably mine. The very handwriting they had mocked for years now stared back at them in bold black ink. Serena leaned forward, her face paling. That can't be right. That looks like scratches. That's not even legible. Mr. Halden's voice was firm. It doesn't need to be pretty, Miss Serena. It only needs to be legal. And it island. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. For years, they had laughed at me, but now, their laughter was caught in their throats. But their laughter died the moment Mr. Halden, the lawyer, opened the folder. Mr. Halden began to read. The lawyer's voice carried through the room like a judge delivering a sentence. His words were calm, precise, and unshakable. Per the wishes of George and Evelyn Grant, the estate is to be divided as follows. I watched my family lean forward, their greed hidden poorly behind feigned solemnity. Isabel's hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Paul's foot tapped anxiously on the hardwood floor. Serena, however, wore her familiar smirk, as though she already knew the will favored her, but she didn't. The family home, Mr. Halden continued, is to remain in the care of the executor until such time as she decides its future. Should it be sold, the proceeds will be split evenly among the remaining siblings, at the executor's discretion. A murmur rippled through the room. Isabel's eyes widened. Paul sat up straighter. Serena frowned. At the executor's discretion? She repeated, her tone sharp. Meaning, Corinna gets to decide when and how? That is correct, Mr. Halden said simply. Serena's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. He moved on. The antique shop, including all assets, inventory, and financial accounts, is to be placed under Corinna's management indefinitely. She may choose to continue the business, sell it, or pass it down, but the authority remains hers alone. Paul groaned audibly. Seriously? She gets the business too? Mr. Halden glanced at him briefly, then returned to the paper. These decisions were made by your parents, not me. They entrusted Corinna with the responsibility. Then he continued, listing stocks, bonds, and other assets, each line sealed with the same phrase, under the authority of the executor. With each passing sentence, the weight of my position grew heavier, and the tension in the room grew sharper. Finally, he reached the end. This document has been reviewed and notarized. It is binding and final. Signed by George Grant, Evelyn Grant, and Corinna Grant, executor. He turned the paper for everyone to see. My signature stood out at the bottom, the loops and slants as messy as ever. Serena leaned forward, her lips curling. That's supposed to be her signature? It looks like a child scribbled it. How is that legal? Mr. Halden's tone was firm. Because intent matters, not penmanship. That signature is unique to Corinna, and it has been witnessed, recorded, and verified. It is every bit as valid as your parents' signatures above it. Serena scoffed, tossing her hair. So we're all just supposed to let that decide everything? Those scratches? I finally spoke, my voice calm but steady. You've mocked my handwriting all my life, Serena. But whether you laugh at it or not, that messy signature carries more power than your perfect cursive ever will. It's not about how it looks, it's about what it stands for. For once, Serena had no snappy comeback. She sank back in her chair, her face flushed with anger. Paul muttered under his breath. Unbelievable. But even he didn't try to argue further. Isabel looked between me and the lawyer, her expression conflicted, shocked, but not entirely unsupportive. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with realization. The truth was undeniable. The handwriting they had mocked for decades was the very thing that now held their futures in its grip. Serena broke the silence, her voice trembling with desperation. This has to be a mistake. Dad wouldn't actually put her in charge. Not with that handwriting. Not with her history. Mr. Halden fixed her with a steady gaze. There is no mistake. Your parents chose Corinna. They trusted her judgment. And this document makes that clear. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her pride cracking under the weight of the truth. I sat back, my hands folded in my lap. For years, their laughter had made me feel small. But in that moment, watching them realize the power of my messy scrawl, I felt taller than I ever had before. And then he pointed to my signature at the bottom. The laughter returned, but this time, it was nervous. After Mr. Halden finished reading, the silence in the room seemed to stretch forever. No one wanted to be the first to speak. It was as if my family needed time for the words to sink in, for the realization that I was the one in control to truly settle. Then Serena let out a sharp, nervous laugh. Come on. This is ridiculous. We can't seriously let everything ride on that scratch. Look at it. It doesn't even look like a name. She jabbed her manicured finger at my signature on the page, her voice rising. That's not a signature, that's a mistake. My third grader can write better than that. How can we trust it? Her laugh this time wasn't joined by anyone else's. Paul glanced at her, uneasy. Isabel pressed her lips together, her fingers twisting in her lap. The others didn't dare echo Serena's bravado, but she wasn't finished. Mr. Halden, surely there's a way to challenge this. I mean, look at it, it's illegible. Couldn't anyone just scribble something and call it her signature? How do we even know it's valid? Halden leaned back in his chair, his calm presence a sharp contrast to Serena's frantic energy. Miss Serena, the law does not require signatures to be pretty or legible. They are required to be unique and consistent. Corinna's signature meets both requirements. We have multiple records verifying it, from her parents' estate planning, from bank documents, even from prior legal filings. This is her signature, and it is binding. Serena's smirk faltered. So, you're saying there's no way around this? That is precisely what I'm saying, he replied. Her face flushed crimson. So I'm supposed to accept that her chicken scratches decide my future? I finally spoke, my voice quiet but firm. It isn't the handwriting that decides, Serena. It's the trust our parents placed in me. My signature simply reflects that trust. You've laughed at it for years, but it's the mark they believed in. That's what matters. For once, Serena had no immediate comeback. Her mouth opened, then shut. Her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. Paul cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Well, maybe we should talk about this before we just accept it. I mean, it's a big decision. Maybe Mom and Dad didn't fully understand what they were doing when they made her executor. Mister? Halden's gaze sharpened. I can assure you, Paul, your parents were of sound mind when these documents were signed. I personally witnessed their clarity and intent. They made this choice carefully. Paul muttered. Still seems strange. But even he sounded unconvinced. The nervous energy in the room grew thicker. I could feel their resentment pressing against me, a weight I had carried for years. But this time, I didn't shrink from it. I sat taller, my hands folded calmly, letting the silence speak for me. Serena finally broke again, her voice sharp. So that's it? We just let Corinna decide everything? She gets to control the house, the business, the assets, everything because of a squiggle at the bottom of a page? Yes, mister, Halden said flatly. That is exactly it. Your parents made their wishes clear. And unless Corinna herself decides otherwise, this is the final word. The certainty in his tone silenced her. I looked at Serena then. Really looked at her. For years, she had held power over me through her laughter, her sharp tongue, her relentless mockery. But now, the balance had shifted. She was the one scrambling, her voice cracking, her pride crumbling, and all because of the very thing she had ridiculed the most. It was poetic justice. I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. You thought my handwriting was irrelevant, Serena. But today, you learned it isn't. You've spent years laughing at something that doesn't matter, all while ignoring what does. Responsibility. Trust. Respect. That's what Mom and Dad saw in me. That's why my name is on this will. Her eyes burned with anger, but she said nothing. Around us, the others sat in silence, their expressions caught between shock and acceptance. Isabel's eyes glistened, as if she finally understood the years I had endured. Paul avoided my gaze. And Serena, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Their smiles vanished as reality sank in. They tried to argue. Serena couldn't sit still. She tapped her nails against the arm of her chair. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Her pride had been wounded, and when Serena's pride was wounded, she didn't stop clawing until she felt like she had regained ground. This isn't fair, she snapped suddenly. You mean to tell me everything hinges on her? On that? She gestured wildly at my signature on the page. That looks like a bird dragged its feet across the paper. And you're all just fine with that being legally binding? Mr. Halden adjusted his glasses calmly. It doesn't matter how it looks, Serena. The law recognizes intent and identity, not calligraphy. This signature is Corinna's, and it was validated multiple times throughout the estate planning process. Your parents confirmed her authority with complete clarity of mind. Serena scoffed, but I could see her confidence slipping. She turned to Isabel and Paul. Come on, are you seriously just going to sit there and accept this? Corinna can barely write her own name, and we're trusting her with everything? Paul shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Isabel sighed softly, her voice measured. Serena, you know Mom and Dad didn't make decisions lightly. If they chose Corinna, they had their reasons. Serena's head snapped toward her, eyes narrowing. Of course you'd say that. You've always defended her. But Isabel didn't flinch, maybe because she deserves it. The words hung in the air, a quiet defiance against years of Serena's dominance. I wanted to thank Isabel, but I stayed silent. This wasn't about me begging for recognition. This was about them realizing the truth on their own. Serena turned back to Mr. Halden, desperation creeping into her voice. Then what about contesting it? There has to be some clause, some loophole, some way to challenge this. People do it all the time in movies, drag it into court, make the judge throw it out. Isn't that possible? Halden's expression remained calm but firm. Possible, yes. Advisable? No. Contesting a will is an uphill battle. And in this case, it would be futile. Your parents were deliberate. They left no ambiguity, and there is a clause in this will that ensures their wishes are honored without interference. He flipped a few pages, his finger trailing down the text until he found the line. Here it is. We appoint Corinna Grant as executor of this estate with full authority to act without bond, without oversight, and without challenge. Her signature alone shall be binding, final, and beyond dispute." The words dropped like stones into the silence. Serena blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Beyond dispute? You can't be serious." "I am very serious," Mr. Halden replied evenly. "Your parents anticipated resistance. They chose their words carefully. Corinna's authority is absolute. No court will overturn it, no matter how many jokes you make about her handwriting." Her cheeks burned red, her eyes flashing with indignation. "So, that's it? She gets everything her way, and the rest of us just sit back and accept scraps?" "This isn't about scraps," I said softly, finally breaking my silence. "This is about trust. Mom and Dad trusted me to handle things fairly. They knew I wouldn't use this role to punish anyone. But they also knew I wouldn't let anyone twist their wishes into something they never intended." Serena glared at me, her voice sharp. "And we're just supposed to take your word for it?" "You don't have to," I said, my tone steady. "You just have to accept Mom and Dad's word. They wrote it down, signed it, and sealed it. I didn't put this responsibility on myself, they gave it to me. And now, whether you like it or not, I will honor it." The room fell quiet again. Isabel looked at me with a softness in her eyes. Paul avoided my gaze, and Serena sat rigid, her fists clenched in her lap. Mr. Halden closed the folder with finality. "I suggest you all make peace with this. The will is clear. Corinna is executor. Her signature is final. End of discussion." The ticking of the grandfather clock echoed in the silence. I let the moment settle, the weight of it pressing into every corner of the room. For years they had laughed at my handwriting, reducing me to nothing more than squiggles and scribbles. But tonight, that same handwriting had silenced them. And as I sat there, their stunned faces surrounding me, I felt the balance of power shift once and for all. And he reminded them that handwriting they mocked was the very thing that sealed their fate. The room erupted with protests. The moment Mr. Halden closed the folder, the quiet broke like glass shattering on stone. Serena shot to her feet, her voice rising higher than it ever had before. "This is absurd," she shouted, her face flushed, her chest heaving. "We can't just let her of all people dictate everything. Do you know how unfair this is? Do you know what this means for the rest of us?" Paul groaned, running a hand over his face. "Serena, calm down." "Calm down?" she snapped, whirling on him. "You think this is something to be calm about? She's got control of the house, the shop, the accounts, everything. And all because Mom and Dad couldn't see that she's—" She stopped herself, but I knew what word she had bitten back. Irrelevant. That was what she wanted to say. That was what she had always thought of me. Paul sighed again. "Look, I don't like it either, but yelling isn't going to change anything. The will's the will. You heard him, it's binding." Serena glared at him as though he had betrayed her. "So you're just going to roll over? Let her run everything? Let her handwriting decide your life?" Isabel finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "Serena, this isn't about handwriting. It's about trust. Mom and Dad trusted Corinna. You should try respecting that instead of tearing it down." Serena scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You've always been on her side." Isabel's eyes narrowed, her tone sharpening. "And maybe that's because she deserves it. Do you have any idea how much she's done for this family while you've been busy mocking her?" The words struck Serena like a slap. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For once, I didn't rush to defend myself. I let the silence sit, let Isabel's words hang in the air like a truth too heavy to ignore. But then Paul added fuel to the fire. "Still, I don't get it. Why Corinna? Why not me? I'm the oldest. I should have been the logical choice." I turned to him, my voice calm. "Because being the oldest doesn't mean being the most responsible. Mom and Dad saw who showed up, who stayed, who carried the weight when things got hard. They didn't choose me out of pity, Paul. They chose me because they knew I wouldn't let them down." His jaw tightened, his pride wounded. But he didn't argue. Serena, however, wasn't finished. She turned back to Mr. Halden. Her voice trembling with desperation. There has to be something we can do. A loophole. A technicality. She can't even write legibly. How can that be considered a proper signature? Mr. Halden's tone was unyielding. Because the law recognizes it as hers, Miss Serena. That is all that matters. You may not like how it looks, but it is binding. And so is her authority. Her face crumpled with fury. So we're just supposed to accept that her scribbles outrank everything? That she gets the final word? Yes, Mr. Halden said simply. That is exactly what your parents intended. The words silenced the room again. For years, Serena had been the loudest voice, the one who dictated the tone of gatherings with her mockery. Paul often followed her lead, and Isabel often kept the peace. But now, for the first time, I realized something. The louder they shouted, the smaller they sounded. Their anger didn't intimidate me anymore. It revealed them. Their greed. Their arrogance. Their refusal to accept that their power had slipped through their fingers, not because of me, but because of their own blindness. I sat back in my chair, hands folded, and let them rage. Let them sputter, let them expose themselves, because every shout, every protest, every insult only made one truth more obvious. They had underestimated me for too long, and now, it was too late. The more they shouted, the more powerless they looked. When the chaos died down, I finally spoke. The shouting had drained them, like children throwing tantrums until they were too tired to keep crying. Serena sat stiff in her chair, her eyes blazing but her voice gone hoarse. Paul leaned back with his arms crossed, staring at the floor. Isabel looked between them with quiet disappointment, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I straightened in my chair, letting the silence stretch a moment longer. Then I spoke. For years, you've laughed at me. I began, my voice steady. You've treated my handwriting like a joke. Like it meant I wasn't capable. Like it defined my worth. Every note I wrote, every list, every card, it became your punchline. Serena's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't interrupt. I continued. I stayed quiet, not because I was weak, but because I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. You didn't want to hear the truth. You wanted to laugh, and I let you, because I thought peace was better than conflict. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room. But tonight, that ends. Tonight, you've seen what my handwriting really means. It isn't a joke. It isn't irrelevant. It's my signature, the signature Mom and Dad trusted to carry their wishes forward. The signature that seals this will and gives me authority over everything they built. Paul shifted in his seat, uneasy, but I pressed on. You thought the messy loops and jagged lines proved I was careless. But those same scribbles are what keep this family's legacy intact. They trusted me, because they saw past the surface. They knew it wasn't about how my writing looked, it was about who I was. Isabel's eyes glistened, a small nod confirming her agreement. I turned to Serena then, my voice softer but sharper than any knife. You mocked me the most. Every time I tried to contribute, you cut me down. You waved my handwriting in front of everyone like proof of my incompetence. But tonight, your laughter has no power. Because the very thing you used to tear me apart is the very thing that now holds you accountable. Her face flushed, but she said nothing. I leaned back, my words slowing, deliberate. Respect isn't optional, not in this family. Mom and Dad knew that. They wanted someone who would honor their memory, not someone who treated it like a game. And I won't let their legacy be mocked the way you've mocked me. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with something new acknowledgement. Even Paul, though he said nothing, didn't meet my eyes. His silence was an admission in itself. I took a breath, my voice steady but firm. This isn't revenge. I'm not here to punish anyone. But I won't be dismissed anymore. I won't let laughter erase the years I spent caring for Mom and Dad, running the shop, holding this family together when no one else would. I have earned this role. And I will honor it, whether you approve or not. For the first time in years, the room was quiet without laughter. Not the uneasy quiet of people waiting for the next joke, but the heavy quiet of respect. I looked down at the will one last time, at my messy scrawl beneath my parents' neat, deliberate signatures. For decades, I had hated that signature, wished I could change it, make it prettier, neater, more acceptable. But now, I saw it differently. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine, and it was enough. And for once, no one dared to laugh. That night, I sat alone with the silence and finally felt at peace. After everyone left, the house was quiet again. The chairs were pushed back, the glasses sat half empty on the table, and the echo of raised voices lingered faintly in the air. But beneath it all was a new kind of silence, one that didn't sting, one that didn't suffocate. It was the silence of resolution. I gathered the papers from the table, running my fingers over the thick parchment. The will. The legacy my parents had trusted me with. The proof that, after years of ridicule, they had seen the truth of who I was. I walked into the study, the same room where I had once signed those documents with trembling hands. The same room where I had tucked them away in the drawer of my desk, carrying the weight of their power in secret. Tonight, that weight felt different. Lighter. I sat down at the desk and pulled out a pen. For a moment, I stared at the blank sheet of paper before me. My hand hovered, as if waiting for permission. Then I began to write, not a will, not a list, not a note that would be mocked or dismissed, just words, my words. The letters sprawled unevenly, my familiar messy loops and jagged lines tumbling across the page. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hate them. I didn't cringe or wish they looked different. Because tonight, I understood that those imperfect strokes were more than handwriting. They were proof of me. Proof of endurance, of resilience, of being underestimated and still standing. I smiled faintly as I wrote, the ink flowing like a quiet victory. I thought of Serena's face, frozen in disbelief when she saw my signature at the bottom of the will. I thought of Paul's silence, of Isabel's support, of the way the laughter had finally died when the truth became undeniable. For so long, they had treated me like a footnote, the family member whose quirks made for easy jokes. But now, they knew better. They had seen that what they mocked was the very thing that gave me power. And deep down, I hoped they would remember this night not with bitterness, but with understanding. That respect matters more than appearances. That trust is earned, not assumed. That handwriting, neat or messy, doesn't define worth actions do. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the messy scrawl across the page, and whispered softly, Mom, Dad, thank you. For seeing me when no one else did, for trusting me with this. The fire crackled in the hearth, the warmth wrapping around me like an embrace. I felt Leon's presence too, as if he were there beside me, reminding me again of his words. It's not how neat your letters are, it's what you stand for that counts. And tonight, I knew what I stood for. I stood for the years of sacrifice no one acknowledged. I stood for the quiet strength of doing the work others avoided. I stood for the legacy of my parents, who believed in me when laughter tried to erase me. I set down the pen and folded my hands in my lap. The page before me was messy, imperfect, and absolutely mine. And I knew, without doubt, that it was enough. Because at the end of it all, the last laugh hadn't been theirs. It had been mine. They laughed at my handwriting, then realized it was my signature on the will.